Welcome to another edition of Truth Seekers. We have Patrick as our guest today, along with Nick and Josh. That's me. We're going to talk about defining success today. Such an important topic with defining where we're going. If you think of being a traveler, being out in nature, having a compass, identifying where true north is. Think of if that compass didn't have a true north, how would you know where you're going? And I think that analogy might hit home with Patrick. I know he's a fan of the outdoors. Patrick, your true north, if you will.
Yeah, I think as once you presented this topic to me, I think I immediately gravitated to kind of who do you allow to define success in your life. A lot of times that can come externally as opposed to internally. You can kind of allow people to tell you whether or not you're doing the right thing, and you can allow the opinions and perspectives of other people to maybe overwhelm your own. And I think what I have chosen to be my main metric for whether or not I'm feeling successful and I'm living the life that I want is it tends to be more personal happiness. Like when I put my head on the pillow at the end of every day, am I content with what I did and who I did it with and what I accomplished? I think professional success is often a big driver for so many people, but I don't think that can be the only facet of your life that plays a role in that definition.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I got the image of when you allow other people to influence your definition of success. So take the compass analogy. You're looking at your compass. Other people's magnetic fields, the closer they come, the more you allow them to influence your definitions of success. Make that needle spin. Like it's harder to read because, it might settle in one direction, but somebody else will come close and it spins in the other direction. It's not as easy to keep straight as if you're truly in touch with your own internal compass.
Yeah, I like the compass analogy. I might prefer a map.
Old school.
I take the pin and I put it where I feel like I need to end up. I think allowing somebody else to have an outsized role in the definition of your success is they yank that pin out and they put it somewhere else and they tell you that's where you need to go in order to feel as though you've accomplished something worthwhile.
I love where we're going with this because there's so many little analogies we can play with and have fun. It's like you. I wonder, like Patrick, if you put the pin in where you want to go, like is that the first thing you do, or is the first thing you do put the pin in where you are?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think success ought to be relative. I think success it has to inevitably come from growth or has to come from change. I think there's a certain maybe a romantic appropriateness to being comfortable with who you are and accepting yourself and maybe that being your what makes you happy or makes you content. But I think knowing what needs to change in your life or what it is that you want to accomplish professionally or personally or socially or whatever area of your life you want to improve or that you want to change. I think understanding who you are and what aspects of your life you need to change. So understanding where the pin is now and where that pin needs to be. I think that's crucial. I think that self-awareness is probably the right starting point. Absolutely.
And I guess if you follow it through as well, thanks for sharing that. Like you've put the pin in where you are, you put the pin in of where you want to go. Then what happens when you get to the pin of where you want to go?
Yeah, I think it's an evolution, right? Like none of us are static people. None of us are finished products. It's constant reassessment. I think that it's important to check in with yourself. So often we can get so caught up in our daily routine and you can call it a grind if you want. And I think that, the current connotation of the grind is the hard work that you're willing to put in is one way to look at it. But the grind can also just be that means by which you burrow the rut that it's really hard to get out of. And constantly checking in with yourself to recognize if you've the goals that you've set for yourself have become stagnant and are maybe no longer relevant to the life that you're leading. That self-awareness and that introspection or an ability to be introspective is really important, because what you wanted to accomplish when you were, graduating high school isn't probably the same thing that you want to accomplish now that you've reached, the precipice of adulthood for some of us, or actual adulthood for others. Like those, we grow and we change, and we're different people than we used to be, and we're people that are different than we wanted to be at previous points in our lives.
Love that about being reflective, Pat. So what, like how often would you recommend being reflective, or how often are you reflective? Is it like once you reach the goals that you set, or, along the way? What's a good cadence?
I'm going to go back to what I said earlier about when your head kind of hits the pillow every night. If you find that you're content, if you find that you're happy with the day's work that you put in and the interactions that you had, and this is maybe hard to assess, every day, but the direction that your life is going. I think that part of it is inbuilt. Part of it is that gut feeling where deep down whether or not you're doing the right thing. But I think that it's also important to have, you can call them maybe slightly more arbitrary markers, but every month, every 6 months, every year, like I think it's important to have, mechanisms by which you're going to be checking in. Josh, you've always been such a big proponent of getting goals and ideas down on paper. I'm not great at that, admittedly. I'm a little bit more, fly by the seat of my pants, if you will. But I think that that the notion of having something that you can refer back to, or a milestone in your year or in your quarter that you can point to and say like, oh, okay, time to step back and see what I want to accomplish and kind of where I've gotten.
I'm glad you said that, because I was going to answer Nick's question and say, well, I would just pull the pin out and put the pin in a new spot. But instead of that, I think I'll just put another pin in, because what you're saying, Pat, is like success is progressive, and you'll constantly keep moving the goal line for yourself, because you'll have to. You're not going to stop when you get at the pin. But the celebration of success along the way, and just recognizing what you've accomplished and how far you've come, is part of the journey. That's part of the enjoyment of it. And when you look up on the map and see all these pins from, like you say, graduating high school to now, it's easier to see how far you've come, what you've accomplished, and even where you're going, when there's more than just one pin in, and that you keep moving the goal line for yourself. What do you think of that analogy, Nick?
Yeah, I love it, because it's kind of like you get to your pin and you can take stock, because to your point, Pat, like it's measuring success of like, well, when you put your head down on your pillow at night, like, can you sleep, like, or do you feel good? Because you don't really know that when you don't know if getting to your next pin is what you want most of the time until you get there. So it's just
Sure.
about, so it's like, you've got to put that in, because it's part of the journey, to your point, Josh. And it's like, you don't want to stand there just waving the next pin and just looking around going, where should I put this thing? Like, it's got to be somewhere all the time, because you've got to be moving, because what's the alternative? If you're not going after your own pin with your own aim, your own definition of success in that part of your journey, then usually you're fulfilling someone else's journey. Because if you're not being, like, to your point, Josh, around like the needle in a compass getting pulled all over the place, that influence, if you're not defining it for yourself, someone else is defining it for you, whether you can really feel that or not. You're going somewhere, right? There's some sort of pull. I think it's just so important to have that next, even if it's not right, that you're not going to know until you get there. But it's the doing and the having that aim, because like, if it's like, oh, I need to get to the next level, I need to get success, I'm not sure what it is, so I'm not going to define it, because if I define it and it's wrong, then I won't be in the place where I want to be. Or worse, if I define it, what success is, and I don't get there, then I've also defined failure. And if I don't get there, I'm a failure. But what's the alternative? What are your thoughts, Josh?
Yeah, I'm thinking of another analogy, but I'm trying to.
Follow that one as well.
Well, I like, so I'm adding topography to the map. So you got the two pins, like say you got to go up over a mountain to get to this pin, but in the meantime, it like veers you off track. And I think much like, Nick, you and I have talked about this recently with like, sometimes if it's hard to know where to put that pin in that you're going to, just put it in somewhere that you think is best and then take the action. And along the way, maybe it'll change, but you gain clarity along the way that you wouldn't have gotten unless you took that original action. And the other analogy I was going to make, and I know Pat is an avid dart player, so here's a good analogy.
God, here we go.
And I don't know, I'm assuming that there's a game where you just want to get the highest number of points. Like I know there's a bunch where you got to cross off, but like if there isn't, say there is, that you just want to get the highest number of points. Obviously the bullseye, you want to hit the largest number of bullseyes possible. All right, so say you're counting down from 500. Is this a game, Pat, or am I making this up here?
It's 501
Okay.
during which you want to work down, and bullseye's not the highest score on the board, but these are all trivial details. So just run with the bullseye. That's
all right. So
the most comfortable.
if you want to get the most points possible, you're going for the highest score on the board.
Yeah.
However, when you get to the point where you need a 38, for example, you're going for that double 19. If you need it changes as you go. So you have your mindset, I need to do this all the time as much as possible. And then when you get to a certain point, it changes, becomes something different.
Yeah, I think talking about failing to reach the point that we had previously defined as success, where if you aim for it and don't reach it, I guess in a binary world, you could consider that failure, but we don't live in that binary world. I think not achieving a goal that you set for yourself either means that you have chosen to redefine what that goal is, or you just haven't gotten to that bit of success yet. It means that you're still, again, kind of a work in progress. So I think it's that checking in, it's that assessment that's going to tell you which of those it is. If you're still happy on the pursuit of that goal, if you're still feeling as though it's something that you both can achieve, and more importantly, that you still want to achieve, then it's not that you've failed, it's just that you haven't gotten there yet. But that checking in is also going to allow you to say like, okay, well, if that's not what I want anymore, then maybe it's time to step back and put the pin where it needs to be now. So, that's not to say that we never fail, because, we all come up short of goals that we have, of things that we wanted to achieve by a certain time in our lives. But, I think it's important to be constantly reassessing and to be aware of things that you still have control over. I forget who said it, but somebody mentioned the importance of celebrating successes, of reaching those pins. And even though that's not the finish line for our lives and for success, because we've got to be constantly reassessing those goals. I'm curious, Nick, how often do you let yourself rest on your laurels for a moment and celebrate those miniature successes along the path?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Triple 20, right? Highest score.
There you go. I figured the Brit would know.
Right. If I could put my pint down long enough to play it, yeah. But I think that's an art, Pat. I think that's the art there. Like, and it tells me a lot about where your mindset is as well, because you're immediately calling out and saying, "Hey, look, we're not failing. We're just learning, or we're just getting more information." And I think that's what we're saying here as well. I love your point, Josh, as well, because look, if you're in the middle of like the desert and all you can see in front of you is a road, and there's no milestones along the way, there's nothing. Like it's just 1,000 miles of road. I go 100 miles, it looks exactly the same. 100 miles, it looks exactly the same. I go 900 miles, it looks exactly the same. It's not until like 980 miles where it starts to change. It's different. So it depends. It's a function of what your goal is, how big it is, where are you in your life, and where are you seeing about where you need to put that next pin to overlap analogies, like the different parts of it. It's okay, well, is my next milestone this month? is the journey that I'm on right now a significant journey where I have to be very strategic in those milestones so I can still feel the progress, even though along that 1,000-mile road, there's nothing for 980 miles. Because think about that, what it does to your psychology, right? You're 100 miles in, same. 200 miles in, same. 300 miles in, same. You might think, okay, cool, I've got 700 miles to go. At some point along that way, you're going to start to lose momentum and get fed up and bored, which is going to stop you moving forward. So that to answer your question, Pat, it's going to be a function of those things, what you need for yourself. But celebration is so important because you can only build on success. I've got 300 miles. Cool. Next milestone is 400 miles. Cool. Next time is 500 miles. And so you celebrate the milestones for what they are rather than what you get for the milestones. But, you know, if it's something where the journey is relatively short, I've got 100 miles and every 10 miles of those things, I'm getting reinforced. The outside is reinforcing me. My environment is reinforcing me. Because look, the biggest indicator of change is going to be environment. If your environment is changing along the way and supporting you, you're not necessarily going to need to have to do that as often for yourself because it's in there, it's built in. So this is why it's so important, right? To know and have the awareness of what you need for you and what's the size of the goal. How big does it feel for you, right? And I love the topography thought because it's just like, I think about it like climbing. It's like it's just wherever my foot will go next, like whatever I can grab onto. It's like, as long as I'm making some movement.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that I think about it as like this notion of scale, right? And I don't want to like take this analogy so far into the weeds. I think, although we may have crossed that boundary, but like the size of the pins are important too. Once you've set maybe an overarching goal for yourself that is going to impact the next 5 years, like everybody talks about, like the kind of quintessential 5-year plan, but that's impossible to game plan for unless you break it down into more digestible chunks. You know, in order to get to 5 years, you first got to get through the first 6 months. In order to get through the first 6 months, you've got to have kind of a week by week plan. And I think making it more digestible, making it more approachable and less daunting is essential. And that also is going to give you those mini causes for celebration that let you know that you're on the right path and that you are getting closer to that bigger pin.
Yeah. It's like, why don't people go for those bigger goals? It's just because they think it's too far away or it's just too big. It doesn't seem real, doesn't seem possible. But to break it down, it's just like putting one foot in front of the other. Like by the time you get to the point that you're on that 1,000-mile journey and you're in the last like 50 feet, the last step you take, or the last 10 feet you drive, it's just the same as the previous 10 feet or the previous 10 feet or the last step. It's the same action. It's just that's the straw that breaks the camel's back. Thank you for saying that, Pat, because me and Josh actually had a moment like this week. We're in a significant moment for us in our business working together that you could say was not significant in itself, but it's what we can look back on in that quintessential 5 years and say what it actually meant and where it's going to lead to.
Yeah.
We know that same action is just going to be the same action, but the scale to that point is going to be exponentially different because we're going to stack those things on top of each other. That's when you get that compound interest in energy, compound interest in output.
I've heard a definition of success that it's the progressive realization of a worthy goal. So it's not achieving the goal, it's the progressive realization of it. And I think that kind of sums it up pretty well with like, well, you know, what do we celebrate? We celebrate the milestones. You celebrate along the way, just being on the journey, being on the path. And Nick, I love what you said about like your environment will be the biggest indicator of that. You can kind of shield yourself if you're going through the desert by yourself. You know what environment you're going to get yourself into. But, you know, if you apply it more to like building a business or accomplishing something, you likely have a team of people around you that are helping you achieve that. And there's this interplay with each other that you're helping each other out. And I think that's easier to celebrate that success and have that awareness and the knowledge that we're in this together. You know, let's appreciate even the tough times as they come, but let's celebrate like those little mini victories and, you know, appreciate the work that we've put in to get to this point, knowing that there's something bigger out there that we're moving towards.
Thinking about a team setting, or, you know, I work in a pretty standard, like 9 to 5 office setting. And going back a little bit to the recognition of success and figuring out, you know, who is kind of defining it. I think that acknowledgement is essential. And as important as it is to be personally satisfied with the work that you're doing or the progress that you're making towards that worthy goal, either being able to offer your congratulations to somebody who has achieved something themselves or who has helped the team progress in a positive way is essential. And like, there's nothing that feels better to me than an attaboy. Like, just receiving that recognition externally, even though, you know, it might be the team's collective goal, or maybe it's, somebody that I'm really close with at work that acknowledges this thing that really only I and the people that really are close to me have noticed. But receiving that recognition, I think, is essential. And that's the kind of feedback that really makes you motivated to take those next steps, even if they get a little bit monotonous or it gets hard to see the forest for the trees in your pursuit of whatever goal it is that you have for yourself. I think a team can really be invaluable in the way that it props you up emotionally as well as practically.
Let's start to get some takeaways here. I got some good notes on, you know, success is ever evolving, celebrating the milestones along the way, constant reassessment. What else, Nick? What do you got on your mind?
Yeah, well, first things first, if you haven't got a pin in there, you haven't got an aim, you're not going to get it. Because you don't know where it is, right? And I believe that most people aren't putting that pin in, either just because they don't realize it's not in, they don't realize there isn't an aim, and there's an inbuilt sensitivity to that, because if we define it, then we've also defined failure, and we don't want failure, because failure means we're not good enough, and if we're not good enough, it means we won't be loved, and if we're not loved, then what do we have? So making sure that we have that as a starting point is the most important thing, to define what it is. It's more important to define what it is than what it actually is.
Say that again.
It's more important to define that there is an outcome, there is a goal, than what the goal actually is.
Well, I like that. That's a good one.
It's like, it's so you can get there and go, okay, it was right or it wasn't right. Maybe you'll find out on the way. But it's more important to have it than stand there with the pin in your hand going, where do I put this thing? Because you're not going to get any more information until you start moving.
What do you think of that, Pat?
Yeah. I mean, Newton knew what he was talking about. A body at rest stays at rest. A body in motion it's going to find its way. I think, especially if you are constantly checking in, if you're introspective enough and you're giving yourself enough, kind of personal time, you're going to know if you're moving in the right direction, and your gut's going to be able to tell you that.
I love it. Start somewhere, kind of have an idea of where you want to go, take the action, reassess, celebrate. Summed up pretty well. Repeat
and then die.
Rinse and repeat.
That's the final pin for all of us.
Yes.
That's it.
Awesome. Anything else, guys? Speak now or forever hold your peace. No, thank you, Patrick, for joining us. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, guys. I enjoyed myself.
Take care.